AM 1300 WMEL.
The views expressed on the following program are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and are not necessarily those of WMEL staff, management, or advertisers.
This is Joe Steckler, folks, your host for Helping Seniors, the radio arm of Helping Seniors of Brevard County. I always like to remind my listeners as we start the show that Helping Seniors is here to help educate, inform, and connect seniors and those that care for seniors to the services that they need. We have some of the most wonderful caregiver services in Brevard County of any county out of 3,067 counties in the United States of America. And I think it's extremely important that you know about these services, because if you don't know about them, how are you going to access them? How are you going to use them? How are you going to know how to develop your own aging plan? And folks, I've got a couple of articles coming out probably in, I know they're going to be in Senior Scene, Hometown News Spotlight. There's some very serious things coming out about Medicaid. Don't be led down the primrose path by business people saying they can get you on Medicaid for $7,000, $8,000, $10,000. And when you find out what they've done to you is they put you in a 33% tax bracket where you're going to lose all your money in taxes in the first 3 years. You have lost everything. You haven't gained a cent. The sad part about it is that everything that I will talk about in those articles can be done by you for free if you use the Department of Elder Affairs, the Department of Children and Families, an Agency for Healthcare Administration, the Elder Helpline. You do it the right way. It will not cost you anything but a little investor of time. And that's sad, because I have documented cases of where business people have charged as much as $8,000 on one end, $2,000 on the other, for a total of $10,000 to start, just to get somebody on a Medicaid card, which signifies that they're low to poor income people. So it doesn't make sense. Today we're going to talk about elder abuse, but before I get with my panelist today, Laura Moody, Assistant State Attorney here in Brevard County, I want to remind everybody that the phone number here at the station is 631-1300, and the number for Kay at the office is 473-7770. And you might want to get that pencil and paper ready, because I think that Laura will have some things that you might want to jot down. But the sponsors for the first part of the show include, and notice that every one of them provides some type of elder service: Gentiva Home Health Care, the Eye Institute, Solid Bite Dental Implant, Bill Johnson, Elder Law Attorney, WMEL AM 1300, Wusthof Hospital System, Levin Home Care, Redden Care, which is your medical alert button system. And folks, if you are in danger of falling, please consider getting the medical alert system. It costs you $29 a month. It could save your life. Atlantic Shores Rehabilitation, the social adult daycare down in Palm Bay at 5200 Babcock Street. It's a brand new adult social day club, and we did TV shows down there a month ago, and it's a fantastic place. It's the only adult daycare in Brevard County where you can go home after having consumed a glass of wine, if that's what you want, without any cost, and the guy or gal next to you can be sitting in a wheelchair, because he's specially constricted his bar so that you can either stand up or pull up to it in a wheelchair. There are a lot of thoughts gone into it. You know, growing older gives a lot of pain sometimes, but there can be a lot of levity, there can be a lot of fun, a lot of comradeship if you just know how to do it. And the last one I want to mention is Ebony News Today. We're now have a feature column in Ebony News Today, and I'm really, really pleased with Ben Kane, who is the publisher of the paper. He's on our advocacy board to develop an advocacy plan for Brevard County. And Ben is a great guy, and I'm glad that Ebony News wants to be a partner with us. Now, having gotten all the commercials out of the way, I'm going to welcome my panelist, Laura Moody, who is Assistant State Attorney for Brevard County. And what do you do, Laura?
I work at our local office of the state attorney, and currently my position is to head up the Elder and Economic Crimes Unit. Phil Archer, our state attorney, has been a huge advocate for the elder population in Brevard County and was very insistent and passionate that we keep that unit going. It was actually a unit that had started many years ago. It had, with budget cuts, been done away with, brought back by Norm Wolfinger in 2011. So since 2011, I have headed up that unit and worked to really try to bring elder abuse cases to the forefront of our judicial system and try to put tools in place for our law enforcement officers, the court system, to start to really recognize these cases, much like we recognize child abuse cases and domestic violence cases. That movement happened a couple of decades ago, and so what we've been doing is really trying to bring elder abuse to the front of the legal system, if you will. So trying to bring these cases that many times hide in the shadows of the court system to really put a spotlight on what we're seeing in the community as far as elder abuse goes. So we handle all of our exploitation cases, abuse, neglect, violent cases, as well as financial cases on any of our elderly victims in the community. We get charges that range from your typical exploitation, neglect type of scenario to robberies that have an elderly victim, burglaries that have elderly victims. So all of those cases, if they're criminal in nature and they come to us from law enforcement or the Department of Children and Families, our unit is the unit responsible for addressing those and prosecuting them and bringing them to court.
I already know the answer to the question I'm going to ask, Laura. Just what you said in that opening statement, it's just like the lawyer before, just like if you watch Blue Buds. You're like Aaron on Blue Buds. You presented your case. You presented a case for a couple of shows. We will never get through what we need to talk about in one radio show. So I'll ask you if you will come back again in the future.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Now, Laura sent me a bunch of questions, folks, but I had 3 questions that I want to set the stage with. And the first one is, Laura, what is elder abuse? What is it?
It takes the shape of a variety of forms. So when we say elder abuse, we are using an umbrella term, but really at the core of it, there is a physical side of abuse and an economic side of abuse. So when we say elder abuse, we could be talking about financial abuse, but we might also be talking about physical abuse. So under Florida law, there are really 3 main categories that we would consider elder abuse. That would be the exploitation cases or theft cases, which are financial abuse. And then the other side of the house we consider physical, which would be neglect cases where somebody is not being cared for, they're not being given the medications they need, they're not being provided the services that they need to maintain their life or their health. And also with that, we have physical abuse cases. So those would be our violent cases where we have an offender who would be pushing, shoving, battering, hitting, slapping. So there's really, we say elder abuse as an overall umbrella term, but it really somewhat gets divided into 2 categories, which would be economic or physical. Yep. And we handle all of them.
And having said that, I've also, over the 25 years that I have worked with senior citizens and women with regard to abuse of any kind, the one type of abuse that sort of gets passed over by so many people is self-abuse. And that's that can be financial, it can be physical, it can be everything. And I guess what it boils down to that after listening to what you said, Laura, I would say to a listener, if you have a question about anything that you think constitutes abuse, make the phone call.
Absolutely. I speak to a lot of professionals and they will ask me, well, Laura, I'm not entirely sure when I should report. I don't know if this is significant enough to report. I don't know what the consequences of reporting will be. And I tell anybody, if you have any suspicion, you don't need proof, you need a suspicion that there is abuse, neglect, exploitation, physical omissions to act, or financial abuse happening to a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a coworker, anybody that you come into contact with. Make that call to the abuse hotline. If you aren't comfortable calling local law enforcement, which that's certainly an option as well, but certainly make that call to the Department of Children and Families. They have an abuse hotline. It's 1-800-96-ABUSE, and know that number, call that number. They will start an investigation, and if they find something criminal, they will then get law enforcement involved, and then law enforcement will get our office involved. If the Department of Children and Families goes out and investigates, and they may not find anything criminal, but they might find a self-neglect issue or some type of a self-abuse type of issue, they will provide social services. They will get services into a home or into a person's life where they will accept them, or if they don't have the ability to accept those services, then they will get involved. So it is always far safer to make that call than to not do anything at all. And I also think it's important for listeners to know that the calls made to the abuse hotline, the reporter information, people don't necessarily recognize this, but that caller information is always kept confidential. The Department of Children and Families has an obligation to report every case to us that they verify abuse or neglect. And even our office, the state attorney's office, is not permitted to know who the reporter was. So even though they have a statutory requirement to report the case to us, even we have that information redacted from our report. So people are always concerned that there may be some backlash if they report. They're afraid to call. But I think it's very important for listeners to know that their information will be kept confidential if they do make a report. So, and sometimes that helps people to feel a little bit better about calling if they fear retaliation or have concerns about making that phone call.
Except when you get people like me that make a comment to somebody that should be doing something and they don't do something, and I will say, if you don't do this, I will make the phone call myself.
Right.
Of course, and I've done that many times, and it's it's like putting yourself across the breakers, but still it's the right thing to do. Before the show, Laura and I were talking, and I asked her a question about, do you believe, Laura, that people really make the phone calls that should be made, and how did you answer that? I'm talking about if 200 report, how many do you think should be reported?
I know that this is an issue that is completely underreported. I mean, we know the statistics of underreporting is staggering. We know that for economic abuse against the elderly, the numbers are about 1 in 44 cases that actually get reported. And I know that in Brevard County, the last time we looked at the data, I know the Department of Children and Families receive roughly 1,800 calls a year, and that's just an approximation. That's not an exact number. And of those, really only about half ever go to law enforcement as potentially criminal. And then of those, our office only receives a fraction. There's reasons for that. Certainly law enforcement would never send us a case that there wasn't probable cause that a crime had been committed. That's the standard that they have to send us a case. So it's certainly, there is a filtration system that is proper in that trio of investigative agencies looking at these cases. But I certainly know that particularly with regard to neglect, those cases are very underreported, and the reason for that is that generally we're talking about a very vulnerable population who may not feel that they have the ability to report. If the only person that they have in their life is their caretaker, and it's the caretaker who's abusing them, we know we don't see those cases because there's nobody from the outside looking in to make that report, like you, to be able to make that call, or me to make that call, because it's a problem that we know is significantly underreported by the very nature of that vulnerable population who becomes victimized in these cases. So our exploitation cases, we know, are very underreported as well. Many of our older adults don't want to be adversarial. They become not necessarily complacent with the abuse that's happening, but they're more afraid of addressing the issue than, getting us involved. And so there's some certain dynamics that go along with those cases.
What about, let's say a person reports abuse, and investigators just simply say, we can't find anything wrong. Yet, I know of cases where people sleep with baseball bats because they're afraid of children. They've been choked by their children. They can prove it. How do these potential victims, how do they pursue this? What would you advise somebody that thinks that they're a victim of abuse to proceed in order to make something happen? How do you fight it?
You really, really, first and foremost, I say, number one, anytime I'm talking to groups, that preventing these cases, and that's why I'm so glad you have me here today, preventing these cases is so much better than prosecuting these cases. They are difficult cases to prosecute, so we would much rather see them prevented from ever happening in the first place. And the way that our population really needs to do that is to remove the harm. Remove the harm from the home. So if you have somebody living in your home who's a threat to you, you have to remove that threat. And if that is your only source of caregiving, I would certainly encourage people to take advantage of the numerous resources that we have in this community that are, such as your organization, that are set to help seniors and to get them connected to the right individuals. So, and that's very difficult many times when it's family. People are very afraid to remove family from homes. But if that person is a threat, number one, you have to remove the harm, because the law enforcement agencies and our office, the key thing to always remember is that our office can only prosecute cases that we have proof beyond all reasonable doubt that a crime occurred. That is many times very difficult in cases, particularly physical abuse cases. If there were no witnesses and no injuries, we have a very difficult time proving cases that way. And so the number one thing people can do is really be responsible for removing those outside threats to get that harm away from them. And I see a lot of people who keep inviting family members back who take advantage of them financially or harm them physically.
Well, most of the abuse, I would say a preponderance of elder abuse actually occurs at the hands of a family member.
I would absolutely agree with you.
And probably one of the biggest is the cleaning out of the checkbook.
Definitely.
And so Laura made a comment about removing or preventing the source of danger. And in this case, while you have to many times have to have somebody else's name on a checkbook to pay the bills, you can be more careful in who you put on a checkbook. Not just because it's your son or your daughter, it doesn't mean they're the best person to put there. How do you work with that one?
That is such a good question. The key thing I think that people don't realize when they go down to the bank to add a person to the account is that there are different ways to add a person to the account. Number one is you do not have to make a person a joint account holder for them to have signing authority on that account. You can put somebody on solely as an agent with power of attorney who solely has the authority to sign on that person's behalf. And a lot of people the easiest thing for a bank to do would be to just add a person as a joint account holder. And people don't recognize that when they add somebody as a joint account holder, now that person owns that account just as if they are the original person on the account. So how the person is put on, talk to your banks with a banker and say, I want this person solely on as a signer to be able to write checks for me so they can help me pay my bills. That's the only reason they need to be on the account. And there are different types of accounts they can set up to where they have limited rights to the account, because we have difficulty prosecuting until October of 2014 when the new laws passed regarding exploitation. We could not prosecute cases where there was a joint account holder who was accused of taking monies out of those accounts for their own usage, because under the law they technically own the property and you can't be charged or convicted for stealing your own property under the law. Now that has somewhat changed. This past year there was revisions passed under the exploitation law that do now make it criminal for somebody to misappropriate funds from a joint bank account if the sole purpose for them being on that account was to assist in signing checks or paying bills, that they were not put on that account to own the account. They were put on the account to assist the original elderly victim with
and would most of this come under on a durable power of attorney?
This can be power of attorney, or these account issues can just happen between two people. We see it most frequently arise with somebody who has power of attorney who then opens an account and puts both names on the account. But I've seen this situation arise numerous times where no power of attorney was involved.
See, I happen to be a real strong advocate and believer in a durable power of attorney, because in developing a durable power of attorney, you have to go to an attorney, and that attorney should know what he's doing, he or she is doing, and should be explaining to that potential client exactly what you're talking about and why you should do this or why you should not do something. And if more people would pay attention and use attorneys to do the things that they are trained to do instead of using Office Depot forms or Staples forms, we'd probably be a lot better. And with that, I got the music. We're going to take a mid-show break. We've only talked about one umpty scratch of what Laura and I want to talk about, so please stay with us for the second part of the show. We'll be back with you in about 3.5 minutes. Stay with us.
AM 1300 WMEL.
This is Joe Steckler, folks. We're back live for the second half of today's Helping Senior with Laura Moody, who is the Assistant State Attorney here in Brevard County, and we're talking about elder abuse. Before I get back to Laura, I want to remind everybody of two phone numbers, the one here at the station, 631-1300. If you have a question and you think you've had an instance of self-abuse, you have a question for Laura, you don't have to ask your name. Just call and ask a question. The other number you can call is the office at 473-77770, and that'll get hold of Kay. And our sponsors for the second part of the show include Senior Scene Magazine. And folks, go to that newsstand and look at the new issue of Senior Scene Magazine. We have an 8-page newsletter in there. It's absolutely beautiful. It's Kay Kaiser and Carrie Fink have put this thing together, and it's just beautiful. It's just loads of information. And there's a big thing happening at Space Coast Center for Independent Living, which I think more people need to know about it, because senior transportation is one of the biggest problems we have here in Brevard County. And Space Coast Center for Independent Living has a great transportation program, very inexpensive, but you need to know about it. So take a look at that. Hometown News, Spotlight Magazine, Seniors Helping Seniors, The Fountains of Melbourne, Beth Courtney of the Braswell team, their financial planners, Kendall Chiropractic, Canadian Meds of Melbourne, as with Joe Pons. And don't let Joe scare you if he calls on you. He's a big guy, and he looks like he played nose tackle for the Chicago Bears, but he didn't. But he's big enough to. Wiedemann Malik from the attorneys downtown, and they're really great. The guy we work with mostly is Scott Dixon at Vitas Hospice, and a new sponsor, Peaceful Beach Mediation, which is attorney Brooke Goldfarb. And Brooke is a Harvard attorney. She believes strongly that we try to solve the problem before we get to the problem, and that's exactly what Laura is talking about here when we talk about senior and elder abuse. Many times, if we do things the right way, we don't get into the situation, but one of the things that seeing is believing. So one of the things I was going to ask Laura, as an assistant state attorney, I know, Laura, that you've seen a lot of cases that have come before the courts. But how about just for our listeners, describe a typical case and some of the ramifications, some of the problems you encounter?
I'm going to talk about one of our typical exploitation cases, because that seems to be the crime we're seeing more frequently than any other case in our division. So in a typical exploitation case, we would have somebody who may be slightly homebound. They have either a family member, as you mentioned before.
Talk right into the mic.
Or a caregiver who is in the home. And what we see tend to happen is access of a checking account that they maybe either put themselves on, the caregiver or a family member, or they just actually outright gain access to the checkbook, blank checks, and start writing themselves checks. We see a high frequency of people filling out applications for credit cards that may have come to the house. And so the family member or the caregiver who is involved in the exploitation will open up credit accounts in our victims' names. And then essentially what happens is just spending sprees. We see vacations being purchased, cars being purchased, and usually those large purchases happen if that person gains access to the account, as we talked about earlier, with regard to being a joint account holder. So a typical case, as we mentioned earlier, we see a lot of family. It could be an adult child, it may be a grandchild, or it could be a friend of grandkids or friend of the children who gains access to credit cards or checkbooks or the accounts and really just does account takeovers and just starts spending. Almost all those cases involve purchases of cars, purchases of many, many dinners out. And usually in the cases that we see, these exploitation cases, our victim is generally fairly homebound. So that travel, the vacations, the eating out every night is just really unusual and suspicious for the lifestyle that our victim may be living. So, and there are a number of things that I would say that would help to deter some of these cases, as we talked about before, which would be, freezing credit so that people can't get access to open a Discover card or open a Capital One card if that person has frozen their credit through one of the credit bureaus or all of the credit bureaus, and really safeguarding checkbooks, making sure that blank checks aren't just laying around and people can't get access to checkbooks, and really monitoring mail. That's a very, very important thing to do. We see frequently the number one thing that will happen is the way that bank statements come to the person will change. The offender might change it to online banking, knowing that a person may not be computer savvy, and so they're no longer getting access to their paper records, and they don't know what's happening to their financial accounts. So really important to monitor that. If you have a caregiver or you have a family member living in the home or friends who come into the home and suddenly you're no longer getting your paper statement and you have always gotten a paper statement, that is a very, very big red flag for potential exploitation. And
but Laura, if we are talking about if the person is being exploited, a couple of things. They have to realize they're being exploited, and then they have to make the decision that if they report this, that the loneliness and the fear factor can then enter the equation, because it's been my experience that in older people that have one or two caregivers, if they even think they're going to lose that friend, it's probably one of the greatest disasters that they can even think about. And they don't think about the loss of the money or their livelihood as much as they think about the loss of that friendship, which is really not a friendship.
I absolutely agree with you. The number one barrier to prosecuting these cases is that fear of being alone, not having that person in their life, the fear of the consequences of what will happen to that individual, because these are people who they're quite fond of. I tell people all the time, thieves do not come cloaked in masks with guns in our exploitation cases. They are very nice. They get a lot of access by being very friendly people, being very nice people. So these aren't cases that are the type of crime where somebody is robbing a convenience store at gunpoint. These are cases where a perpetrator methodically grooms their victim, we see a lot of isolation happen where that offender will isolate that person from the outside world. They will shut out family member who may have been concerned, and now suddenly they won't let them take phone calls from family members. They're not going to church or support groups or out to senior centers or doing the types of activities they were once involved with. So we do frequently see one of the biggest barriers is to recognize that person who's taking advantage, that's what they are doing. And when they start shutting out the outside world, in Brevard County, we are very fortunate. There are a tremendous number of resources, community centers, senior centers, places that people can get involved, or services that can come into the home. So I would say it's very, very important to recognize that it doesn't have to be that that's the only person that a person can be dependent on. But the reality is, in numerous cases that we do have, that is a factual statement. There is only one person in that person's life, and that is the person that is taking from them. And many of those are the cases that we really likely aren't seeing in the court system.
Yeah. I did a recent TV show with I can't remember who I did it with, but two of the things came out that you're talking about now, and one of them had to do with scams, and another had to do with family members being involved. And I'll hit the scam thing first. The person that talked to me about it was the person I mentioned to his name before the show. He said he had a good friend that he encountered him someplace, and this guy was trying to get a money order made out. And he said, "What are you doing that for?" And he said, "Well, it's my grandson. He's down someplace. He's in trouble, and I've got to get some money to him." And the guy said, "Let me see what you're doing." And he looked. He says, "That's not your grandson's not in trouble." He says, "They're hooking you for money." It was a scam where they call a grandparent and say, "Your grandson is in trouble in jail," and it's not his voice. It's somebody else makes a phone call, but grandparents want to believe that their grandchildren are in trouble. This guy had already been taken for $7,200 before the friend of ours got him to stop. But that's one of the oldest scams in the book. And I guess when I have Bill Johnson on the show, our best advice we give is if it looks like somebody's going to give you $1,000, erase it, because they're not going to give you $1,000. And if somebody's calling you for help, erase that too, because if they want help, they'll call you on a telephone.
Absolutely. I always tell people, if you are the person being solicited to do something, so somebody has reached out to you because you have won a lottery or you are a benefactor in another country, anytime they reach out to you, it is certainly a scam. Anytime you make a call, say your computer is not functioning and you make a call for service and you reach a legitimate person, it's really important to remember that anytime anybody is reaching out to you, most likely you are definitely dealing with a scam. Absolutely. And we see the grandparent scam that you mentioned. That is just the gift that keeps giving to scammers, because we have repeatedly, I know it's been in newspapers and magazines, and I know we have gone and talked about it numerous times, and it is a very effective scam. I have a friend too who fell prey to that, and we, continue to warn people that anytime people are asking you for money, if they're asking you for money for lottery winnings, if you've won, you don't have to pay anything, and you cannot win a lottery that you did not enter. And generally speaking, you are not going to be a millionaire in another country. And so really important to keep those things in mind. One thing I did want to mention, too, when you asked about that isolation, to address this issue with scams, what we see is many of the victims who fall prey to these scams, they really like talking to these individuals on the phone. As I said before, these thieves come cloaked in very friendly, sweet, generous nature. So they are very good at sucking the person in by kindness, and then they become very intimidating or threatening when they're not getting their way any longer. Yeah. So we have at our office, we actually have volunteers through a STARS program. It's called the State Attorney Resource for Seniors. And they're there, and they will certainly, we ask anybody who wants to become connected with one of those volunteers. They are companions who will call, check on people. And so I like people to know that our office has that program. So if they just want somebody to chat with on a weekly basis, we do have volunteers that will fill that.
Okay. Before I ask you another question, if people does your office, you have a website?
We do. What
is your website? Write this down, folks.
Okay. You can reach the state attorney's office website. It is www.sa18.org. And on that website, there are helpful links to a variety of, really explains all the different divisions in our office, all the different crimes we prosecute, but has links to external resources as well.
Okay, now how about the people that are not internet or computer users? What phone call could they make locally to talk to somebody? And once they make that phone call, do you all give briefings or do you give presentations so that people can go find out about what we're talking about today?
We do. We're out and about quite a bit, most recently at the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day Fair. I know we have Senior Fest coming up in October that we hope to see a lot of people at. But our office phone number for anybody who needs to reach us is 321-617-7510. And that we have a unit staffed with a victim advocate who will be there to take calls. We have an excellent assistant who is always there to take calls. And as I said, we have volunteers who also come and staff our unit specifically. And all of our volunteers staff in the Elder Services unit, they are fantastic and know definitely where to refer people to if we can't answer the question. We have Kathy Dudley, who's our advocate, and Laura Mutter, who's our assistant, who can definitely take care of that.
But I want to make one additional plea, Laura, to our listeners. If you don't succeed on the first try, don't give up. You know, if your livelihood, if your financial livelihood, if your peace of mind is worth anything to you at all, take the time to make the phone call. And if you can't get through, keep calling them. I do the same thing. I get more frustrated with the elder helpline, and I have written more letters to Tallahassee because our brilliant legislature several years ago took all the local helplines and put them into Senior Resource Alliance places where these 11 PSAs in Florida. And you know, I don't like talking to somebody about a problem over a telephone. I'd rather look them in the eye, Laura, and say, here's what I think. How can you help me? What should I do? And it's hard to do that over a phone. It's even more difficult when you're 75, 85, or 92. And I just had one person, 95, call and say, Joe, I can't get through to these people. What do I do? I said, well, look, if you can't get through, call me back, and I'll make sure I get through. And I've done that. Of course, what I get through, but I call the Secretary's office in Tallahassee and say, unless you want to spread all over the newspaper and the radio, call these people.
Right.
Try to help them.
And I think it's really important, too, to know the limitations of our office, because I do get concerned when people call in and they're frustrated that they're not getting any answers. So important to know that for our office, you know, we're going to be, if you have a criminal issue where you are concerned because you believe that you're a victim of crime, those are cases we're going to be able to help you with. We cannot help you with civil matters. We cannot help with landlord and tenant issues, those types of things. So I would certainly also say in Brevard County, I think our 211 line has a wealth of information about what resources are available, and Brevard County is a fantastic county as far as the number of resources available. So if you're not having any success with us, it's probably because you don't have a criminal matter, and we are going to unfortunately have to refer you elsewhere. So I do know in Brevard County, if you have other issues, landlord-tenant issues, meal issues, utility issues, that probably I would recommend the population call 211 as well. They
won't know that answer, Laura, if they don't persist in getting through to you and talking to somebody. So the onus has got to be on your office to provide the service, but the onus also has to be on the person that has a possible complaint, because if a complaint doesn't get to you, you don't have a chance to help them.
And we've had numerous cases that have actually been generated by our office where people are dissatisfied with the answer they're getting from law enforcement, or they're dissatisfied with the answer they're getting from DCF. So they will contact our office, and I invite people to call us if you, as you said, if you're not happy with the answer that you're getting from law enforcement, or you're not happy with the answer you're getting from DCF, to certainly give our office a call. I'll take a look at the case. If I believe it's something criminal that could be prosecuted, then I will basically reversely refer it out to the right law enforcement agency to get somebody involved to collect evidence.
We've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask a question, and I don't know, this may not come under your prerogative, but if it does, and if you can help us with this, I would appreciate it. On 15 January, the Florida Supreme Court issued an advisory that said that it is illegal for people to practice law if they're not an attorney. And this has to do with Medicaid claims, filling out Medicaid paperwork, qualifying people for special needs trusts, and doing things like that. There are financial advisors and other companies that see this as a way to collect a fee for getting a person who already are low to moderate income people, and we're charging them $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 to get a service that the state does free. Is there any, and I noticed there's been ads in the paper, the Medicaid has a 5-year look-back period where it says, and there's a reason for that. If you qualify for Medicaid, fine, you need it. If you don't qualify for it, you don't need to be using it. But now the VA aid and attendance is thinking about going back into a 5-year look-back period. So I'm seeing ads in the paper now where people are saying, this is going to happen, so start planning now. And to me it says, start planning now to see how we can help you beat the system. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with people using my taxpayer dollars for things they shouldn't be. Does this come up under the state attorney general jurisdiction or not?
You know, we really don't. We generally refer any of our Medicaid fraud cases to the Attorney General's office. They do have a Medicaid fraud control unit in Orlando. So they are generally the office that would address these types of issues and those kinds of concerns. Our office generally is not getting those types of cases where there may be some fraud in the application for Medicaid or the way that Medicaid is being received and utilized. So I would certainly encourage anybody who has any Medicaid fraud issues, that would be the Attorney General's office, Medicaid fraud control unit that does address those cases.
I think this is a new area where elders could really be trapped in the years to come because the VA has been exceptionally good. And one of the biggest things we find is that so many elderly women that are living on reduced Social Security income and food stamps suddenly find out that they're qualified for VA aid and attendance, and they're getting an additional $1,400 or $1,500 a month. It's like we've won the sweepstakes thing for to be a millionaire. But it's true. There are a lot of good things. We're just about out of time, Laura. What was the last thing you would like to say to our listeners today about your office, what you can do to help people?
Well, I really want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, but I just want to make sure that people do know that in Brevard County we do have a specialized unit that does address elder and economic crimes, and I gave the phone number earlier. We're at 321-617-7510, and as I said, I think the most important thing for people to know is that we are there and we do listen to people, to the victims in the cases. Many times I hear that there are concerns about sending grandchildren to prison, or I could never report this because I don't want to see anything bad happen. And I do want the public to know that we really listen to what it is they think is important. So if they tell me, I think that my grandson needs drug treatment, he has a drug addiction, I don't want him to go to jail, we're really going to listen to that. So if we can be of help, we certainly want to be of help to help take care of these issues.
And before you gave the elder abuse line as 96-ABUSE.
1-800-96-ABUSE.
Is that 1-800-963-5337?
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think it's right. I hate that abuse. I like the numbers. So I just want to double check. Thank you, Laura, for being here today with me. And we will come back, and I'll ask Laura to come back. And I've asked her to write a column for our next issue of Senior Scene Magazine. And thank you, Vern, for operating the board. And thank you, listeners, for listening. And please tell others about helping seniors so that more people can get the help they need and, in many cases, deserve. Have a great 4th of July, and I'll be with you next Thursday. Allah willing. Bye-bye.